Welcome to Fanshawe College's television studio, and thank you to Fanshawe College and their television production and broadcast journalism programs for partnering to put on this debate. This debate is for the London West riding, and there are 9 confirmed candidates. They have all been invited to take part in this debate. I'm your moderator, Brona Morgan, host of LDN ONT TV on Rogers TV. Full disclosure, I have run in past elections, but today I'm representing Rogers TV. All of the questions that will be asked have been reviewed by Rogers TV to ensure that they are fair and not biased. Joining me in asking questions today is Mike Lacasse, a student in the broadcast journalism program here at Fanshawe College. There are 7 candidates joining us today, and they are Vanessa Lalonde from the Liberal Party, Mike McMullen from the Freedom Party, Colleen McCauley from the Green Party, Cynthia Workman from the Ontario Party, Peggy Sattler from the NDP, Jacques Boudreau from the Libertarian Party, and Brad Harness from the Consensus Party. Paul Pilato from the Progressive Conservative Party and Chris Hunt from the New Blue Party were invited to the debate but will not be attending. We will start with 1 minute for each candidate for an opening statement. We will then move into questions from myself and Mike, where each candidate will get 1 minute to answer the question. 30 seconds may be given for a rebuttal at my discretion or Mike's discretion. When we're finished with the questions, each candidate will then have a chance to make a closing statement. Numbers were drawn prior to the debate to determine the seating and order of opening statements. We'll go in reverse order for the closing. And for each question, we will start with the next candidate in line each time. Before we begin with opening statements, just a reminder that it is a policy of Fanshawe College that we wear our masks whenever we're not speaking. For opening statements, Vanessa Lalonde from the Liberal Party is up first.
Thank you for having me here today. I'm Vanessa Lalonde, your Ontario Liberal candidate for London West. A bit about me, I run a small business with my sister that supports Indigenous artists, creators, makers, and businesses. And I live in London West with my husband and 3 kids, and we love it there. The reason I am running to be your MPP is because I want to make sure that you have a voice at Queen's Park. I also want to make sure that our vulnerable have a voice at Queen's Park, that they are heard and taken care of. Because in Ontario, we have so much, and there are so many with so little. And we can change that. We need to change that. We need to make sure that we are taking care of everyone here in Ontario.
Thanks, Vanessa. Next, we'll hear from Mike McMullen from the Freedom Party.
Oh, hi, my name is Mike McMullen. I'm with the Freedom Party. The Freedom Party has existed in London. It actually started in London about 30 years ago. When I was asked to run for it, I completely agreed because their policies actually adhere to my beliefs as well. I was born in London, Ontario. I attended Fanshawe, actually. Took electronics when I attended here. I served in the military for about 20 years, and I ran federally twice, back in 2019 and in 2020. So this is my 3rd kick at the can. The reason why I'm running is I just want to, as we have seen, inflation is skyrocketing, homelessness is skyrocketing, drug abuse. There's so many issues that it just keep compounding and compounding and compounding over the years, and it doesn't really seem like these issues are getting addressed or fixed, and they just keep getting worse. So I want to restore democracy back to our democracy and give actual Londoners a voice. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Now we'll hear from Colleen McCauley from the Green Party.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today and for inviting me, for everyone that's joining in. I've lived in London for 15 years and specifically in London West for 12. My name is Colleen McCauley again. I'm the Green Party candidate for London West, and I have joined the Green Party because I understand the values that they have in supporting our natural environment as well as supporting and caring for Ontarians. We've been facing a lot over the last 2 years, and we have seen how it has impacted our healthcare, our education, and our social services. I want to help you and Ontarians build a caring society, get connected communities, and also join the new climate economy so that we all can transform Ontario into a leader. And thank you very much. As we go forward, we want to build smarter. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Next, we'll hear from Cynthia Workman for the Ontario Party.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It is a great honor to share the stage with such stellar candidates and to run as the Ontario Party candidate for London West. Friends, we are living in dark days on all fronts, economically, politically, and spiritually. We have watched in horror at the erosion and dismantling of the very rights and freedoms our brave men and women of the armed forces fought and died for. Make no mistake, my friends, we are in a spiritual battle and are being groomed and mandated to believe the lies and drink the Kool-Aid. To win this battle for our future generations, it will take godly men and women to lead this province back to the foundations it was not only built upon, but thrived on. The Ontario Party stands for what Ontarians value most: freedom, faith, family, fiscal responsibility, transparency, and truth. The Ontario Party and I have the boldness and moral courage to take back Ontario, speak truth, and bring revival and freedom back to this great province of ours.
Thanks, Cynthia. Next, we'll hear from Peggy Sattler from the NDP.
Thank you very much, Brona. Since I was first elected as MPP, I have been committed to making a difference for people, and that is what I will continue to do if the voters place their trust in me once again. Together, we've been through 2 incredibly challenging, painful years, and just when it looks like the pandemic might be over, life is getting harder instead. The cost of everything just keeps going up, from gas to groceries to rent, and we still don't have the healthcare system we can rely on, the schools our kids deserve, and the opportunities to build better lives for ourselves and our families. While these problems might have gotten worse under COVID-19, they aren't new to Londoners. More than ever, the people of London West need an MPP who will work tirelessly on their behalf and fight to get them the services they need. I believe in this community and will never stop working for you. On June 2nd, I would be honored to have your support.
Thanks, Peggy. Next, we'll hear from Jacques Boudreau for the Libertarian Party.
Hello, everyone. Over the last several months, a number of studies have been published, and these studies were about the impact of the COVID mandates or lockdowns, and they all point in the same directions. That is, in aggregate, they did a lot more harm than good. Case in point, one of the studies out of Simon Fraser University indicated that at the very least, 4 life years were lost for everyone that was spared. This is why today the Ontario Libertarian Party pledges to you that under our leadership and similar circumstances, there would be no lockdowns. If you value freedom and your civil liberties, you must vote Libertarian, for we are the only party fully committed to restoring them to you in full. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacques. And finally, we'll hear from Brad Harness for the Consensus Party.
Hello, my name is Brad Harness. My wife and I live in Old South, and I'm the Consensus Ontario candidate here in London West. I'm also the party leader for Consensus Ontario. Consensus Ontario is a newer party formed in 2016, and I ran in London West in the 2018 provincial election. Consensus Ontario offers something completely unique to voters. We have only one policy, and that is to remove all political parties, including our own, from Ontario's politics and have only independent members of Parliament representing the needs and priorities of their ridings in the decision-making at Queen's Park. All other parties are trying to tell you what's important. Consensus Ontario thinks that this form of top-down politics is bad for Ontario's future, and it's time for bottom-up democracy so that your needs can be heard at last. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those really fantastic opening statements, and nobody even came close to 1 minute. So congratulations on everybody for staying within time. We're going to give the first question to Mike Lacasse, and he's going to start with Mike McMullen from the Green Party. Or sorry, the Freedom Party. Apologies.
All right, so the first question is, what is your party offering young voters in the area of post-secondary education and apprenticeships?
Well, we want to make life easier for young students. We have seen a lot of challenges with college and university students, especially with big debts, student loans and stuff like that. Some people are coming out of school with $100,000 of debt, and with the job economy and stuff like that the way it is, I mean, these people are never going to get out of debt. So I would like to see definitely some subsidies in place to help students, and possibly some things to help them to deal with their loans and stuff like that. When I went to school back in the 90s, when I went to Fanshawe College back in the 90s, we still had grants for people that didn't have the money to be able to attend school. So I actually received one of those grants, so I was actually quite happy about it. So I would like to see more like that happening for students, and so that they can actually get a good start when they get out of school.
And now Colleen McCauley from the Green Party.
So the Green Party would like to make sure that there are loans are converted to grants for students, for the low and middle income students. We want to make sure that there is a base operating grant for post-secondary institutions, and as well as on a weighted national average. We want to be able to restore and make more stable, equitable, enrollment-based funding model for our post-secondary education. And we want to make sure that there's a fair and consistent labor standards and working conditions for faculty as well. So for the students, we want to make sure that there's apprenticeships that they can join the new green climate economy, as well as making sure that they have the post-secondary education to have those to get those jobs after they're done with their education.
Cynthia Workman for the Ontario Party.
The Ontario Party seeks to lower the cost of tuition and make funding more accessible to careers that are in demand and that we need in this province to make our economy go. We want to make skilled trades virtually free for qualified applicants to engage in. We want to remove most of the funding for courses where there is no hope for jobs, but make scholarships available to those with very high standards. And for those that would like maybe more economical alternatives, we will seek proposals from post-secondary institutions that won't be funded but will be OSAP applicable. We also want to prohibit the censoring of speech on campus and require universities to create guidelines for protest and make sure everyone can speak and be heard and have their freedom of speech.
Sattler for the New Democratic Party.
Very much for that question. Ontario students face some of the highest post-secondary costs in the country, and the government provides the lowest per student funding of any other province. So students are graduating with huge amounts of debts, and one of the first things an NDP government would do is convert all student loans to grants. Any student who is in financial need to attend post-secondary should be able to do so without taking on a huge debt burden. We will also wipe out any student loan interest for students who currently hold student loans, because the government should not be profiting off the backs of students. With regard to skilled trades, we need to make sure that skilled trades have an equal partner at the table for Skilled Trades Ontario. We want to bring back shop classes for in public schools to get more students interested in skilled trades, and we're also going to invest heavily into apprenticeships and co-ops to make sure that we have people who are prepared for the green jobs of the future.
Libertarian Party.
Thank you. Well, on principle, the Libertarian Party does not believe in any of this central planning. We believe that there are many government involvement that increase the price of education. With freedom comes responsibility. It is incumbent upon people to decide for themselves if they are going to go into something that has marketable skills. I think back to the McGuinty years, where the message from the government was pretty much that if you didn't go to university, you didn't amount to anything. This was a terrible piece of advice. People should go into trades, certainly if they have the aptitude. And I mean, I can tell you that I have a son-in-law who's an electrician. The future bodes very well for him. So by all means, do your work, study what is going to be in demand, the things that give you marketable skills, but then be prepared to have a job that will enable you to pay back the debt if any debt is incurred. Thank you.
Brad Harness of the Consensus Party.
As an employer, I can say without a doubt that Ontario is facing a serious labor shortage, and it's at all levels of most companies' operations. In terms of entry level, students, graduating students coming out with debt, or looking at whether they should perhaps pursue something like an apprenticeship program. What's important, I think, is to note that not every student needs a university degree. There needs to be a better linkage between prospective jobs and programs offered through community colleges and universities. it's perhaps paramount that ridings have different needs, and these different needs need to be brought forward to Queen's Park so that proper debate can take place and proper decision making when we're creating these programs, in a lot of cases which are highly expensive and end up with a lot of people in burger flipping type jobs.
Vanessa Lalonde for Liberal Party.
Thank you for the question. It's expensive out there, and students need our help. We plan to remove interest rates on student loans just to help boost our students up. They need it. They're our future. And for apprenticeships, we need to make it easier for everyone to get into the trades and to enter our trades. So we plan to introduce shop classes back to our schools so that students can get a taste of that and have real experience working with in different environments. And we need to support new ways for our students to start becoming apprentices. And we plan to give $2,000 to those who are going into the trades through apprenticeships.
Thanks for those answers, everybody. Now it's my turn, and I'm going to be bringing you a question from a London West resident. This relates to transit. Given the number of large employers coming to this region, either not on fully serviced bus routes or not at all serviced by transit, what is your plan to ensure that workers can get to these new opportunities in an environment where, due to such a high cost of living, they will not be able to afford a car and will have to rely on public transit to get to and from work? For this question, we're going to start with Colleen McCauley from the Green Party.
Sorry, thank you very much for the question. I understand that transit is a very important thing for everybody. We know that we need to rebuild our regional transit systems, as well as making sure that transit in cities is also affordable. So we have asked to have the rates for transit to be cut immediately so that people can access that and get around the cities much more easily. Regionally, we want to make sure that they have the ability to have the busing system and the transit systems enhanced as well. So we know that you need to be connected to where you're working, where you're living, and you're playing. So please make sure we also look at the green side of electrification as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Next, we'll hear from Cynthia Workman for the Ontario Party.
Transit is a challenge all across this province. People rely on it, and with environmental concerns, it's become a very big issue. I would look at expanding routes, having more routes, more drivers, making the schedules more flexible so people can get to and from places in a timely manner and are not spending hours on the transit. We need to make the cost for transit in line with inflation, but we also have to take into consideration populations of people's incomes and make it regulated based on income.
Thanks, Cynthia. Next, we'll hear from Peggy Sattler for the NDP.
Thank you very much to that London West viewer for the question. Transit systems have been really hard hit by COVID-19 with a loss of ridership and therefore a loss of revenues. One of the things that the NDP has long been committed to is restoring the 50% provincial funding that should be available to transit systems for operating. That would enable transit systems to look at more frequent routes and expanding routes to get people to and from work. We know that in London, the last mile issue has been a problem getting workers to some of those large firms that are locating south of the 401. We need to look at some innovative models to deal with that. We also need to look at intercity transit. With the loss of Greyhound, we have people who are outside of London who need to get into London to get to work, and the provincial government has certainly a role to play in that. And finally, the GO opportunities between London and Toronto have to be explored and expanded because there's lots of mobility that can take place there.
Thanks, Peggy. Next, we'll hear from Jacques Boudreau for the Libertarian Party.
Thank you. The first thing I would say is that this is clearly a question of jurisdiction. This should not be coming from a top-down approach from the provincial government think for a minute that the circumstances of Kenora and London would be completely different. So these one-size-fits-all do not work. Number two, the government, having granted itself monopoly power, can hardly come out and say, oh, innovative solutions will be provided. The opposite needs to happen. The government should actually get out, in my opinion, although again, this is a municipal jurisdiction element, and let the free market work out. Companies that need workers are going to find ways to get them to work. It's as simple as that. Innovation will come from the free market, not the government.
Thank you, Jacques. Next, we'll hear from Brad Harness for the Consensus Party.
Consensus Ontario believes in empowering our municipalities right across Ontario. Our municipalities are best placed to know the needs of their residents, including their transit needs. Transit works best where densities are increased, and this is why Consensus Ontario wants to see municipalities make all the decisions concerning planning and transit to ensure transit services are realistic and sustainable. Sustainability, for example, in London was a big problem with the LRT proposal and replacing it with the BRT proposal. Whether even the BRT proposal is in the long term financially sustainable, I guess we'll see once it's built. The province's transit role is to fill in the gaps between towns and cities. We're doing some experiments around the province with towns and villages in the countryside. In most cases, that PC's supported program for votes is not sustainable. Thank you.
Thanks for that answer, Brad. Next, we will be calling on Vanessa Lalonde for the Liberal Party. Same question.
Thank you for the question. Riding transits it takes a lot of time out of your day, and it can get pricey. And so the Ontario Liberal Party plans to reduce fares to $1 a ride, and this will hopefully help increase our ridership, taking 400,000 cars off the road, also helping our gas emissions. The transit, we need to expand it to make sure that transit is going where people need to go when they need to be there. And so we plan to budget in $375 million to expand and enhance our transit systems.
And finally, Mike McMullen for the Freedom Party.
Yeah, I mean, I've listened to everybody's comments, and I agree with most of them. With the increase of inflation and poverty in London, Ontario, and I think we can all see it, we do need to do something to be able to help the students. I would suggest buying more buses and, looking at the routes and make sure the routes are feasible. And actually get the people to where they need to go without too many transfers in line. I would say supplementing people that have lower income and need help for stuff like that. We can look at bus passes and lower fares and stuff like that. But I would have to look into the situation a little bit more to completely understand the full gravity of it. I'm not sure what the use is for the buses in London, but if there is a huge problem, I would recommend buying more buses and expanding the routes and help supplementing people that are living in poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Second question from Fanshawe. What are the most important things a provincial government can do to address climate change? And we're going to start with Cynthia Workman of the Ontario Party.
So climate change, we recognize, is a very concerning issue for a lot of people in Ontario and London West, of course. The climate change crisis, however, I feel is overshadowing other legit environmental issues such as clean air, water, and land. We believe at the Ontario Party of good stewardship of our natural environment and its resources. We feel that the more environmental concerns of stopping raw sewage from being dumped into rivers and waterways, and investing in research of things that actually work to make cleaner air, soil, and water is more of an urgent concern to all Ontarians living with the crisis of our waterways and our land erosion.
For Peggy Sattler of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much. There is a huge cost to the economy of not addressing climate change. We are seeing more severe weather events than ever before, damage to infrastructure, flooding, etc. We have to take a leadership role in dealing with the climate crisis. The NDP is committed to achieving the targets under the Paris Accords, a 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030, and then net zero emissions by 2050. The Ford government has been the most anti-environment government this province has ever seen, ripping out the charging stations as soon as they were elected, eliminating the environmental commissioner, gutting conservation authorities. We need to undertake a massive investment in building retrofits to lend energy conservation, create jobs, and deal with the climate crisis.
Thank you, Peggy. Same question for Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
I have the rebuttal first.
Sure.
Thank you. I would invite the NDP candidate to actually read the IPCC report, because what she said about the increase in extreme event is simply not true. Now, on to my bit. There are two elements to this. Number one, the provincial government should actually defend private property rights, and through that, through the tort system, allow people who feel that they've been hurt by damage to the environment to sue the perpetrators. That's number one. Number two, I would point out that over the last 150 years, the average temperature has gone up by about 1 degree Celsius. During that time, the number of deaths attributable to extreme events has come down by 99%. Why is that? Because we are richer. The richer a society is, the more it can deal with certain elements. So anything that the government can do to help us make richer, such as getting out of the way and allowing the free market to produce, the better off we'd be.
Thank you, Jacques. Brad Harness of the Consensus Party.
Well, climate change, now this is an interesting issue. I know it concerns lots of people. It doesn't concern everybody, but it does concern a lot. Going door to door for the past 10 days in London West, I can honestly say it has not come up even once with a voter at the door. But I do expect that it will. Now, the one thing we want to point out about electric vehicles is that they may not be the ideal solution to reducing carbon emissions in Ontario, because there is nowhere near enough electricity to power all of Ontario's vehicles, private and commercial, if everybody switched over. The surplus amount of power generated by Ontario Power Generation is only about sufficient to power about 30% of the vehicles in Ontario at this time. We need to triple our electric production. That will cost huge amounts of money and will need to come from users. As we see in the housing shortage situation, tight supply means rising prices, and that's exactly what's going to happen with electrical shortages and soaring prices if everybody were to switch to electric vehicles.
Thank you, Brad. For Vanessa Lalonde of the Liberal Party.
Thank you for the question. So yes, climate change is extremely important. We need to be focusing on that. And as we saw last year, in 2021, we had record wildfires burning 793,000 hectares in Ontario alone. And that affects so many lives. And so we need to be tackling our climate crisis. The Ontario Liberals pledged to cut greenhouse gases by 50% of the 2005 levels by 2030. And we plan to increase our protected land by 30%, up from 10%. And once again, things like reducing our transit fare and increasing ridership will help get more cars off the road, eliminating our greenhouse gas emissions.
Thank you, Vanessa. And now for Mike McMullen of the Freedom Party.
Hi. The one thing that all Canadians agree on is that we all want clean water and fresh air to breathe and clean water to drink. I don't think any of these practices any of these parties have put forward has made any change in the climate whatsoever. I think a review of all these policies, and specifically, I'd like to know exactly where all this money is going from, because this carbon tax is actually causing inflation. So when the prices of fuel go up, the prices at the grocery store go up. So I want a line-by-line audit of exactly where this money is going to, because I'm not sure anybody in this room will be able to tell me where it's going to, other than maybe fridges for Loblaws. And if the money is not being used for, to help fix anything, that money needs to be returned back to Canadians. This idea, by taking money, makes you more money, is just a load of nonsense. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And now, Colleen McCauley of the Green Party.
Thank you again for that question. Climate change is real and important for a lot of people, especially for the youth these days. We know that adaptation and mitigation measures need to be put in place, and we want to help municipalities do that by helping them electrify their transit systems, as well as the retrofitting buildings, and helping small businesses as well, making those changes and transitions. We want to encourage innovation in the green economy to make sure that people have that shift in jobs, and as well as the education they need to make those jobs happen. So we want to make sure that we have the ability for Ontarians to protect our natural heritage. So we are looking at a blue belt around the green belt to help protect our waterways as well. We want to encourage Ontarians to think about our natural resources as not as burdens. Our environment is not a burden. It is our environment. Thank you.
Thanks for those great answers once again from everybody. So the next question is coming from me. White supremacy is a Canadian problem. It's not a US problem. Comparing Canada to our neighbors to the south and suggesting that we are somehow kinder or better in this area is at best naive and at worst perpetuating this scourge. In light of the many tragedies that have occurred, including in Buffalo, New York, a city bordering southern Ontario this month, and in my own neighborhood in Northwest London last year, what is the role of an elected public official to change things for the better? Peggy Sattler for the NDP, you have the first response.
Thank you so much for that very important question. I think the London's Muslim community was devastated. Our collective community was devastated by the horrific murder of the Afzal family last June 6th, almost a year ago now. And in the wake of that attack, the Ontario NDP, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, Muslim leaders from London and across the province worked together on legislation called Our London Family Act that would take concrete steps to deal with white supremacy, racism, hate, and Islamophobia in this province. It involved changes to our education system, setting up a hate crimes unit, funding an anti-racism directorate to do the critical work that's necessary to make sure that we have a community where everyone feels safe and no one has to worry that they will be harmed when they are going to a place of worship, going shopping, going for a walk on a spring evening.
Thanks, Peggy. Next we'll hear from Jacques Boudreau for the Libertarian Party.
White supremacy is so strong that the people at the top of the economic ladder in this country are Chinese Canadians, followed by Indian Canadians. So the very premise of the question I challenge as not being true. In the past, have volunteered to help distribute care packages around at Christmas time. Every single person I ever delivered to was a white person. So again, this idea that some kind of white supremacy is a guaranteed ticket to success is simply not true. In aggregate, we have laws in place that make certain actions criminal. Let's prosecute them. As for the rest, this is not something for the government. It's for individuals to call out. Every time you see someone who's a racist or says racist thing, call them out. And eventually they will disappear. But it's a minor problem. It's not a major problem. Immigrants succeed in this country quite well, and they wouldn't otherwise. And of course, they want to come here in massive numbers.
Thanks, Jacques. The next person we'll call on for that question is Brad Harness for the Consensus Party.
Thank you. I want to start off by saying that I'm married to a person of color. Racism certainly does exist in London and Ontario and so on. My wife works in the Asian community in capacity as a translator. We deal with hundreds of people every year. Racism is not an issue in all those cases, but certainly there have been plenty of instances where that's the case. I know of people who have been spat on in public for no reason that they just came out the door. In terms of the question, what is an elected official's role in ending racism? I think it needs to center on public education. We need to get the message out every way possible to underline the fact that everybody in Ontario is equal, no exceptions. Thank you.
Thanks for that response, Brad. Next, we'll hear from Vanessa Lalonde for the Liberal Party.
Thank you for that question. So last June, it hit a lot of people that racism is really prevalent in our society. And as someone who has lost a parent, my mother, who was surrounded by racism at the time of her death, I know how real it really is. And growing up, I myself was picked on for being Indigenous. And I've heard plenty of nasty comments, and we need to push through things like our London Family Act and rewrite our curriculum surrounding the horrors of residential schools, but also celebrating our Indigenous peoples and their contributions. And education is absolutely key to fighting racism.
Thanks, Vanessa. Same question, Mike McMullen for the Freedom Party.
I don't particularly believe that Canada is a racist country. We have hundreds of thousands of people that immigrate here every year, and if these people thought that it was a racist country, why would they come here? You know, I'm sure there are people that have certain biases in all nationalities towards others, and I've seen it. But you know, I'm not going to say that Canadians are racist, because that's just simply not true. The most racist thing I've ever seen is Justin Trudeau wearing blackface. I don't even know a single person in my entire life that's ever done that, except for the Prime Minister of Canada. So when we talk about racism, I think we don't want to create fear in the public and make people turn on each other by calling each other racist all the time. It's not the way forward here. And as Jacques said, we do have laws to deal with hate crimes and stuff like that. So that's my approach. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Next person who will answer the same question, Colleen McCauley for the Green Party.
Thank you again for the question, and we understand that racism is a real thing for many, many people and experiencing it. I was truly touched when I found out about the London family that had suffered at the hands of supremacy. And we know that it is important to commit to the reconciliation for Indigenous communities. We want to see that they get the supports they need, as well as the Black marginalized communities as well, see that the health services that they get are for their communities, as well as what they need in terms of their education and any other social services that we provide. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. We'll hear from Cynthia Workman for the Ontario Party, and I know there will be a rebuttal as well coming up.
Thank you. I reject the fact that Canada is being seen as or called a racist country. It used to be that words like white supremacy was held for Nazis and skinheads, and now anyone with white skin color is referred to in terms of white supremacy. The Ontario Party and myself reject that notion. As my good friends on the stage have said, people from all over the world want to come here and be a part of this great country, this diverse population that is beautiful. And as an Ontarian, I think that, yes, racism is very prevalent in society, but we are not a racist country. People should see other racist countries to be able to know what a racist country really is. So I think the Charter of Rights and Freedoms do much to defend people's freedoms, and I would say make the Charter affirmed and used.
Thanks, Cynthia. Now, we've had a request from Mike McMullen for the Freedom Party for a 30-second rebuttal.
I mean, a couple of members brought up this Muslim attack, which was an absolutely horrific situation. But I have not seen any evidence that it was a racially motivated hate attack. If somebody can produce evidence of the contrary, I've looked at the evidence. I mean, I've heard different things from a steering wheel malfunction to intoxication to a mental health issue. Let's let's not turn something, if it's not what it is, then we should actually just tell the truth. Thank you.
And also Peggy Sattler from the NDP would like a 30-second rebuttal.
Very much. There have been comments made today that are deeply troubling. I think that acknowledging that racist structures exist, that there is systemic racism in our society is important. We have to acknowledge that so we can do the work that's necessary to dismantle those racist structures. We're seeing in COVID that racialized communities bore a very disproportionate burden of the impact of COVID-19. We've seen it in employment. We see it across many sectors of society. We have to understand that and work to undo it.
Thanks, Peggy. And also Vanessa Lalonde from the Liberal Party would like a rebuttal.
So I'm just going to start off by saying I completely agree with Peggy and a lot of troubling remarks on this stage. And we need to start young. That's so important. I've seen it with my children. They come home and hear comments. Still, to this day, they have people coming home that are making racist comments at school. So we need to start at a very young age. And yes, once again, Peggy said it so well.
A rebuttal from Cynthia Workman for the Ontario Party.
So my daughter is also biracial, and she has never experienced racism as much as she experienced segregation and persecution for not being vaccinated. And so I think we have many issues, and we have to be mindful that we don't make racism the issue behind every issue that comes up that's in the popular, the go words that we are using and the popular topics, the hot topics that our leaders want us to be divided over.
Thank you, Cynthia. For your next question, the voter turnout in the last election was 58%, which is a 20-year high. However, young people traditionally are difficult to get out to the polls. What is your party doing to address this? And we're going to begin with Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
Well, I certainly hope that the libertarian message is going to resonate with younger people. I mean, quite frankly, I fully understand why people don't bother, because when you look closely at the platform of the traditional parties, you will find that they only differ from each other at the margins, maybe 5%. So what you get essentially is the same party with a different color, because you rotate through them once in a while. I mean, my message to young people is that you are being abused in the worst possible way, because there is so much debt and unfunded liabilities that are being downloaded to you. I urge you to educate yourself and stay away from these parties who think that it's perfectly moral to download onto other generation, the excessive living. Let's face it, right now we're living beyond our means, which is why you are being asked to shoulder, not only you, but grandchildren as well in the future. This is completely unacceptable.
Thank you, Jacques. And now on to Brad Harness of the Consensus Party.
Thank you. Yes, I think we should start by saying Consensus Ontario was created back in 2016 largely due to the voter turnout issue. There were people around the province involved in the foundation of Consensus Ontario, and with 58% being the high water mark provincially, and it's normally lower on an average basis, it certainly left us scratching our heads. Two areas where we would like to see some changes made in terms of improving voter turnout. We want to see the voting age lowered to 16, and we also want to see permanent residents be allowed to vote. In both cases, these individuals work here, they pay taxes here, they use services here, and yet they have no chance to have a say in how their tax dollars are spent or in how those services could be improved. So we think that that will help to improve voter turnout.
Thank you, Brad. And now Vanessa Lalonde for the Liberal Party.
Thank you for the question. I think that as a party, we are presenting ourselves as a new party that has all different ages, and we're focusing on problems that look forward to the future that will affect future voters and or our current young voters, and because everyone needs to feel hopeful for the future. And over the past couple of years, we haven't had that hope, and it just, like, what are we going to do with our lives? We'd have no future of owning a home, or it's so hard to get a job. And so we need to be focusing on those problems, looking generations ahead so that we can provide hope for our young people.
Thank you, Vanessa. Same question to Mike McMullen of the Freedom Party.
I really think, I set up a booth in front of Western just a little while ago, in front of Alumni Hall, and I was talking to students about what they cared about. And one thing that students actually really care about is the freedom of expression, and not to feel like they're being indoctrinated into some sort of liberal utopian school. I think that we need to pull politics out of the school system and allow students to develop their own point of view without telling them how they should think and how they should feel. I think a lot of students are ready to make the jump over to the Freedom Party at this point because they understand that freedom is important. And when you feel stifled, that you can't speak, or if you have an idea but you can't say it because you're too afraid of being called a name or you don't fit into the group, I think it's more important that students be able to voice their opinions and learn from them. And being a student is like learning from your mistakes, and as we all did in our life.
And now on to Colleen McCauley of the Green Party.
Thank you for that question. I understand that a lot of people are thinking these days that it's not worth voting. And the only vote that is not worth it is the one that's not cast. That's the one that doesn't count. So in order to make sure that your vote counts, I've heard Fanshawe students as well as Western students talking about how their voices aren't being heard, how they have not, their feelings for the future, that everything is being downloaded to them. We want to start making those changes now. We know we have to start addressing the issues that are important to you for your education, as well as the jobs that you're going to come out to make sure that you have homes that you can go to and be part of the first-time home buyer market. I've heard of families talking about their fears for their children not being able to buy a first-time home. We want to make sure that is going to happen for you, and we want to make sure that you have a green environment left after all the changes and you're able to adapt to climate change that is coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. And now Cynthia Workman of the Ontario Party.
I think not just young people, but I think a lot of people have just given up hope that there's any choices amongst the three legacy parties. And I think what the Ontario Party does is that we bring hope back to politics, and that young people can see that we are not like the three legacy parties, that we offer different, and we offer hope. We offer leadership so that they can speak freely, because we are average Ontarians just like them. So we understand their lives, we understand, and we're relatable to them. I encourage young people to research the parties, to do their own understanding of what we stand on. And I remind them that their vote is precious, and to become active in politics, because they are the future and they have to start voting with what they want to see for their children and grandchildren. So I think it's because the Ontario Party is so relatable and we're not out of touch like career politicians may be.
Thank you, Cynthia. And finally, Peggy Sattler of the New Democratic Party.
Thank you very much. If you want young people to be engaged in politics, you have to make them believe that change is possible. And that's what the NDP has been doing in the legislature the last 4 years, but also it's shown in our platform. Young people should not have to graduate from post-secondary education with a mountain of debt. They should be able to get into good jobs that offer an increased minimum wage. We're proposing $20 by 2026. They should be able to benefit from paid sick days. They should be able to access dental care and pharmacare and mental health care with their OHIP card rather than their credit card. They should be able to buy a home in the community that they grew up in rather than have to move out because they can't afford anything. They should be able to look at starting a family and be sure that childcare is available rather than put off a family because they can't afford to get care for their children. These are the policies that are going to really engage young people in the political process.
Thank you, Peggy. We are giving a time for rebuttal, and starting with Vanessa Lalonde of the Liberal Party.
So I just wanted to comment on the taking politics out of education. I disagree with that. I think that we need to be teaching our young people about the political system and making sure that they understand how it works. I actually ran into a woman 2 days ago who said she wished she understood more or knew more, and she just didn't know how she was going to vote. And so it's so important that we're teaching our young people about politics.
Thank you, Vanessa. A rebuttal from Mike McMullen of the Freedom Party.
I agree. The fundamental idea of teaching how politics works in Canada, how it works federally and provincially and municipally, and trying to direct students towards maybe some of these roles. But I don't think teachers should be inserting their own opinions and then trying to promote that in the classroom. So when I say take politics out, I mean you take your point of view and you get it out of there and you teach what the kids need to learn, math, science, and stuff like that. Thank you.
All right, great answers, everybody. And our next question is coming from a public health advocate from London. Ontario funds our public health care at the lowest rate of any province in Canada. As a result, we have the fewest hospital beds of any province. We have more than 38,000 people languishing on wait lists for long-term care, and we have too little home care. Will you commit to improving public health care funding to bring it to the average of the rest of Canada? For that question, we will start with Brad Harness of the Consensus Party.
Thank you. Clearly, healthcare funding is the largest item in the provincial budget. It's between 40 and 45%, kind of depends on the year. During COVID, there's certainly been more expended on healthcare because it was absolutely necessary. One thing to point out, though, is 10% of that budget goes to debt, goes to interest on the debt, not debt repayment, but just interest on the debt. And something Consensus Ontario would like to see is a better grasp on the province's finances so that we can start repaying the debt and then redirect those monies that we are spending to cover interest payments on the debt and have that go straight into healthcare. We think that's a far better use of your hard-earned tax dollars than simply throwing buckets of money around the province on all sorts of pet projects, as the Liberals have done in the past and the PCs are doing now, especially in the run-up to the election, and the NDP have certainly done too. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Next, we'll hear from Vanessa Lalonde for the Liberal Party.
So as we've seen over the course of the pandemic, our healthcare system has taken a beating. I have family and friends and neighbors who work in healthcare, and the stories I have heard are completely heartbreaking. We need to be supporting our healthcare workers more. We need to be supporting our nurses and doctors, and we will hire 100,000 new nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers to make sure that they have the supports they need and the respect for nurses. We need to repeal Bill 124, which has taken away nurses' rights to negotiate for a fair wage. That needs to be repealed right away. And we're going to grow our hospital beds to 20%. And unlike some parties, we're going to make sure that we have the nurses to man those beds, because there's no point in having them if we don't have anyone to take care of them.
Thanks, Vanessa. Next, we'll hear from Mike McMullen for the Freedom Party.
Well, we have seen in the past 8 years, or longer, probably longer than the 8 years, the healthcare system has not gotten any better, whether it be Doug Ford or Kathleen Wynne, or whatever the next establishment party is. It's not going to get better. They will promise you everything, but nothing's going to change. Before the pandemic, lineups were out the roof. I mean, I had to get 2 stitches. It took me 8 hours to get 2 stitches. During the pandemic, I visited the hospital 3 times and I was like allowed in right away, no wait time. As for long-term care and home care, I am directly impacted by that. So my mother has, mental illness. She needed surgery. I went to the hospital. I tried to deal with that. And finally, she was put on a 2.5-year wait list for long-term care because she needed the care. That I couldn't handle it anymore because it was, I had so many people coming over and dealing with a variety of issues. So I would like to see a lot more long-term care homes and get this wait time, because some of these people don't have this much time to wait. They don't have 2 to 5 years to get into a long-term care.
Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome.
Next, we'll hear from Colleen McCauley for the Green Party.
Thank you again for that question. Healthcare is very important, and I've been speaking to a lot of people lately about the challenges that they're experiencing in our healthcare system, from the family physicians, primary care being left out of the mix, hospitals being overwhelmed thanks to the pandemic as well as mismanagement. We also have seen where healthcare is neglecting some key issues. Mental health is health, and we need to start addressing that. We need to start give the opportunity. So we have our mental health strategy is the first of its kind, and it's leading the way. We are seeing that nurses like the repealing of 124 is really important. We need to make sure that the professionals in the family health care system have our support, and we can help those professions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Next, we'll hear from Cynthia Workman for the Ontario Party.
So to address wait times and the financial issues surrounding Ontario's healthcare system, I think we first need to do a complete audit to see where all the money's going, because we need to cut the fat out of all of our overspending and take a look to see if some of the is management heavy. We need to redirect those resources where the management is so heavy, but we need to put it to the frontline workers. We need to establish clear bookkeeping measures for managers and make them accountable financially, and to keep the budgets. Find creative ways to make the money work better for us. Stop funding unnecessary procedures and treatments. Permit nonprofit and private hospitals and permit citizens to hold private insurance. Provide funding for more beds in healthcare and more healthcare workers. Streamline the foreign healthcare workers to practice in Ontario if they meet regulations of Canada. Open more spots at medical schools and just broaden the scope of nurse practitioners.
Thank you, Cynthia. And next, we'll hear from Peggy Sattler for the NDP.
Thanks very much for the question. COVID-19 has shown so clearly how our healthcare system is broken, our home care system is broken, our long-term care system is broken. But that didn't just start with COVID-19. The Liberals had left hallway medicine as a reality. London Health Sciences Centre reported patients waiting for a week or more on stretchers in hallways. So we need to make the investments that are necessary to rebuild those healthcare services so that people can count on having the care that they need when they need it. And oftentimes that is at home. And that's why the NDP is going to invest $1 billion additional into our home and community care system. I've heard from so many people who are left without a PSW that they qualify for because there's a revolving door of PSWs because the jobs are not good jobs. We need to make healthcare workers' jobs well paid, repeal Bill 124, compensate those workers fairly, give them good working conditions, so we can have the PSWs and nurses we need.
Thanks, Peggy. Finally, we'll hear, before rebuttals, from Jacques Boudreau for the Libertarian Party.
Thank you. Let me put my actuarial hat on for a minute. In 2013, one of my colleagues produced a study indicating that by 2038, the average province in this country would require 103% of all the taxes collected to pay for healthcare alone. Now, this is due to decades of mismanagement on the part of NDP, Liberal, and Conservative governments. The solution forward, of course, is to decriminalize the ability of people to provide private services. We need more supply. That's the bottom line. And there's no money left, again, due to this mismanagement. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacques. So we've got a few rebuttals. First, Brad Harness from the Consensus Party, 30 seconds.
Thank you. A few more words and thoughts on healthcare funding. Clearly, there's a doctor and nurse shortage problem, and I want to underline that that's especially true in rural and northern ridings in Ontario. There are many people in larger centres who have access, but that's the starting point for our healthcare system, and we have some ideas on how we can improve those doctor and nursing shortages. Non-critical surgery delays due to COVID. We think this is where the money should be spent right now. There are people waiting for cancer treatment and so on and so forth, and that shouldn't have to happen. Finally, let Ontarians decide whether they would like to see more privatization if it would in fact reduce wait times. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Another rebuttal from Mike McMullen for the Freedom Party.
Yeah, I find it interesting that people will complain about the shortage of nurses and doctors when the Ford government let hundreds of frontline nurses go. I'm not even sure the number, it's probably more than that. Just because of a medical choice of not wanting to be vaccinated. I think these people should be hired back and compensated for this decision. Secondly, if the public health care system cannot manage the issue based on growth of people, then we need to look at another alternative like privatization.
Thanks, Mike. And also Peggy Sattler for the NDP has requested a rebuttal.
Yes, thank you very much. We have to shift the focus from thinking about healthcare funding as a drain on the provincial treasury and look at it as an investment in people's health that actually saves money down the road. If you can care for people's oral health, if you can care for their mental health, if you can provide the medications they need, you're going to prevent visits to the emergency room. You're going to prevent acute care admissions. And these are the kinds of upfront investments that our healthcare system critically needs. Privatization is not the answer. It siphons workers away from the public system.
One more rebuttal from Jacques Boudreau for the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, the NDP candidate, they're just playing with words here. The fact is that the money isn't there. And we have untapped supply that needs to come through the private sector. So they can repeat all they want, that they can achieve all of these promises. This is complete nonsense. This is fiscal illiteracy at its best. The money isn't there, and they can go on and on about how it is, it isn't. They simply have to look at the studies to come to that conclusion.
Lively debate on this question. Vanessa Lalonde from the Liberal Party, 30-second rebuttal.
In regards to privatization, in our society, we already have an issue with equity, and privatizing healthcare will just increase that more, and it will do more harm than good for our people in Ontario.
Thank you, Vanessa. Building off that last question, what specific initiatives can young Ontario residents expect from your party in regards to access to mental health services? And we're going to begin with Vanessa Lalonde of the Liberal Party.
So access to mental health services is extremely hard to access right now. I have a friend who had their 4-year-olds on a wait list for 9 months. And for a 4-year-old, that's a long time. That's a big portion of their life. And so we do need to reduce wait times for mental health services. And we're committing to hiring 1,000 mental health professionals for children. And on top of that, 3,000 new mental health workers and addiction workers in general. $3 billion over 4 years to invest into our mental health system, as we need to make sure that we're taking care of those, because when you're in a mental health crisis, waiting is not an option.
Thank you, Vanessa. Same question for Mike McMullen of the Freedom Party.
Yeah, a member of my family suffered with mental health, and I found that the people that were helping her or dealing with her actually did a really good job. I wasn't displaced by that, but I think that every situation is different when you're dealing with mental health. There's different degrees and different situations, so you really need to kind of pinpoint what the issue is and talk to the people and find out what's troubling them, and then try to go from there. And more facilities should be set up to be able to help people dealing with these issues. I know a lot of times what doctors tend to do is just fill these guys with with as much drugs as they can, and that makes them feel better. But I don't think that's, in some cases it actually does worse. It does more damage. But I really think, again, we need a kind of a bottom-down approach and talk to the frontline workers that are actually dealing with it, instead of dealing with politicians who claim to be able to resolve all these issues.
Thank you, Mike. Same question, Colleen McCauley of the Green Party.
For that question, mental health, as I said, is health. We need to start treating it that way in our systems and making sure that youth have the opportunity to reach out when they need it the most. We see our systems where we are not having connected, consistent treatment for mental health, and we're seeing where it's people are going to jail rather than actually getting the treatment they need. So there is opportunity for us to look at creating a mental health strategy that works with primary care workers as well as the social services, other social services, to connect youth and others who need the mental health supports they need when they need it, rather than waiting at these long times that we're seeing. So let's be consistent and make sure that we have the opportunities to connect youth to the mental health support they need when they need it, and as well as others. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. And now Cynthia Workman of the Ontario Party.
Well, I think the first thing that the Ontario Party aims to do is to stop contributing to the issues contributing to the rise in mental health and addictions within the youth community by we've seen is the COVID lockdowns were outrageous, and many children and youth struggled with mental health issues, addiction issues, and even suicide. So the first thing the Ontario Party is going to do is we're going to outlaw the lockdowns. But I think we also have to make sure that the funding is getting to the frontline workers for the youth, that the programs are not just flavor of the day programs, but they're actually programs with evidence-based research that will make sure that these programs actually work, and make sure that the funding for these programs is stable and long-term, because you can't get someone to a spot and then all of a sudden expect, oh, you're healed in 5 sessions. And that's what we see with the current regimes, is that healthcare limits the amount of time that children can see mental health therapists, and that simply does not work.
And now same question for Peggy Sadler of the NDP.
Thank you very much for that question. I'm very proud of the NDP's commitment to bring mental health care services under OHIP. This will make a critical difference for so many people in this province who are struggling with mental health issues in the wake of COVID-19, but we know that this was a problem in London, in Ontario, long before the pandemic hit. The NDP is also committed to bringing mental health workers into schools. There are an estimated 200,000 kids in this province who don't have any connection with mental health programs or services, and a youth mental health worker in schools can get to them. We're going to expand mental health services on campus for post-secondary students who are also struggling in the aftermath of COVID-19, and we're going to fund 60,000 supportive housing units so that people with mental health and addictions can get the wraparound supports that they need to recover and rebuild a good life for themselves.
Thank you, Peggy. Same question for Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
Thank you. Well, mental health is healthcare, so it goes very much to the prior question. Again, it's a question of supply. We need to allow the private delivery of care. I want to address the uneducated comment made by the Liberal candidate who said that they would actually make things worse. Interestingly enough, every single Western European country has a parallel private health care, and they beat us very badly on most metrics. So the very idea that this would make things worse, not better, is not based on any evidence whatsoever. One final comment, we have 10 times as many health administrators in this province as Germany does. That's an area that we need to be looking at. Something is dreadfully wrong when the Germans can do this so much more efficiently than we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. And same question for Brad Harness of the Consensus Party.
Well, mental health services is something that I've confronted in my daily life in London West and throughout the city in a lot of locations. I live close to downtown. I I spend recreational time along the rivers. I've ended up helping a couple of gentlemen who have been living rough along the river, and were very obviously in need of some help. So I put them in touch with who they could get some help from. And this is something that has come up at the door in the past week of canvassing. People in London are worried about mental health issues as they pertain to things like homelessness. It's been very widely reported that mental health problems have increased during the pandemic, and we do have these linkages between addictions, alcohol, drugs, whatnot, and homelessness. Certainly closing Ontario's mental hospitals a number of years back didn't accomplish much in this area. All we did was dump people out onto the streets and leave them to fend for themselves. Youth and adult helplines are helping. Funding of crisis response teams at the police level is also helping in cities and counties to provide some solutions.
Thank you, Brad. And now we're giving some time for a rebuttal, starting with Peggy Sadler of the NDP.
If there was any argument against privatized healthcare services, one only has to look at the record of infections and deaths in long-term care homes that were private for-profit enterprises versus nonprofit. There was a death rate 4 or 5 times as high in privately run long-term care homes versus municipally run nonprofit long-term care homes. We've seen privatized home care, how unreliable that is, how it leaves people without the care that they need.
Thank you, Peggy. And a rebuttal from Mike McMullen of the Freedom Party.
I disagree with Peggy's comments. I think in a lot of cases, privatized organizations are going to do their best, to sell a product. And if that product is better than what the public can offer, then that's great. The fact of the matter is we've got 3-4 year wait times for people to get into these facilities. So we have to do something about it. And we can't just sit here and talk about it. If we need to bring in some privatization for long-term care homes, for example, I say we go for it as long as they meet the same standards as the public healthcare.
Thank you, Mike. And another rebuttal from Jacques Boudreau of the Libertarian Party.
The comment from the NDP candidate is rich, given that the government basically had to shut down the economy in order to try to salvage a healthcare system that wasn't working. So again, her comment that somehow because it's publicly run, it's better, is nonsense. I mean, again, we had to shut down the economy in order to safeguard it. That should tell you how badly run it is. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for Cynthia Workman of the Ontario Party.
I think, whether it's public or private, I think that we need to lay the fault and the guilt at the feds, at the feet of the province, who didn't enforce the legislation, enforce the laws to keep our seniors safe. They should have been in the homes inspecting. They should have been keeping watch. That's what we pay them for. That's their role, is to keep citizens safe and make sure our money that we are paying taxes on is managed efficiently, and that our most vulnerable seniors are being cared for in a loving and compassionate way.
Again, lively debate. Great answers, everybody. A question coming from the community multiple times. For those people who you don't make it to their door, why are you running in this election personally? And what is it about the leader of your party that inspires you to want to be a part of this election and run as a candidate under their leadership? We'll start with Mike McMullen for the Freedom Party.
I think it's important that we restore democracy back to our democracy. We need to kind of do away with all these emergency powers and then put Parliament back in order and then have the debates. I think it's also important to have disagreements in debates instead of, the party leader says something and all the party candidates repeat it. What we need to do is we need to have these robust debates and have them in an honest and effective way. The freedom to assemble, the freedom to choose your own, my body, my choice, the freedom to choose what you put in your body, right? The freedom to, there's a lot of things that our government seems to be pulling back, and I think that what we need to do is we need to restore that. So, I mean, economic freedom, any kind of freedom. We have a provincial government that closed your business while they gave themselves pay raises, right? Which is pretty sad in my opinion. While other people are suffering, they're giving themselves a raise. So, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Next, we'll hear from Colleen McCauley for the Green Party.
Thank you again. My name is Colleen Ann Macaulay, and I am running because I have worked behind the scenes of our political system for several years in different ways through 2 ministries, a legislative office, as well as our electricity system operator. So I have seen how the problems, not just from the way everyone sees it publicly, but I've also seen behind the scenes and what problems we're seeing and how those play out in different programs. I feel that Mike Schreiner is a genuine person. He really truly cares about Ontario and wants to make sure that we have the ability to care for its people, connect our communities, as well as address climate change, which we know is important, and to build a climate economy to do that. So I'm here to back Mike because he is a leader who is genuine and is going to make sure that we can get the changes going forward that we need. Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen. Next, we'll hear from Cynthia Workman for the Ontario Party.
Well, first of all, I've always loved politics. I've always had a fire burning inside to be in politics. And so when, the Ontario Party was built and I started following Derek Sloan, he was a man of integrity and he wasn't afraid of free speech. He was not afraid to face any backlash or fallout. And he's just a brave and courageous, very ethical man. The Ontario Party is also built on 6 pillars. We believe faith, freedom, and family is the most important things in my own life. I feel that the sanctity of life is a very important issue to me and many other Ontarians. And I have wanted a Conservative Party to vote for, but there hasn't been any for many, many years. So now I actually have a real Conservative Party who actually listens to social conservatives' values and morals when, and we feel a part of the party, not segregated or an outcast.
Thank you, Cynthia. Next, we'll hear from Peggy Sattler for the NDP.
Yes, thanks very much for the question. So I grew up a child of immigrants. My brother has an intellectual disability, and that made me very aware from a young age of the critical role of government in ensuring that people like my brother had opportunities that everyone should have in Ontario. It drew me to become a school board trustee in 2000. I served for 13 years on the Thames Valley District School Board because I see public education as so important to leveling the playing field and making sure that everyone has opportunities to build a good life, to get ahead. So long as the investments and the supports are made to make sure that kids with special needs get the support that they need, to make sure that schools are good places for kids to learn and education workers to teach. I have been inspired by Andrea Horvath as someone who is unafraid to hold the Ford government to account, to ask the hard questions, and to fight on behalf of the programs and services that Ontarians deserve.
Thank you, Peggy, for that answer. Jacques Boudreau for the Libertarian Party. Same question.
Thank you. Well, I'm running because I want to fight the fact that governments are getting bigger every single year, which means less freedom. This is a fundamental issue about respect for the individual. With freedom, you can choose to live your life as you see fit and not be told what to think, what to do, how to do it, with whom to do it, which is increasingly what we are living. More and more authoritarianism, cancel culture, ways of thinking that are acceptable or unacceptable according to people who basically are in power because they won a popularity contest. They have absolutely nothing to their names to opine on these things, and yet they believe that they do. This is all wrong. Freedom has always been associated with well-being. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacques, for that response. Next, we'll hear from Brad Harness, the Consensus Party.
Well, first off, I'm running because I live here. I live in London West. It's a great place to live and raise children and grandchildren. I care about making things better for as many people as I could possibly make things better for. I've been involved in a lot of volunteer and charity work. But I decided long ago that to have that effect on a lot of people, it really needed to be done at the political level. In my 26 years as a journalist, I've seen a lot of positive evidence that a partyless system, basically what you see at the municipal level, is the most responsive, quickest, most efficient form of government. And by empowering municipalities to do most of the services, I think that's the right way to go. But people still need a say, and they still need their MPP to actually represent what their concerns and worries are, rather than the top-down approach of the main parties. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Same question to Vanessa Lalonde, the Liberal Party candidate.
I'm running because I want to be a part of the solution. I want to make sure that everyone's voices are heard and that everyone's being taken care of. And honestly, for the Ontario Liberal Party, it's the team that's being built. The team of new candidates is, they're everyday people. There is such a wide variety of lived experiences, and that matters so much, is to have different voices heard. And Stephen Del Duca, he has the experience to lead, and the thing is, like, he listens. He's ready to listen to all of our opinions and make sure that we're doing what we can for all Ontarians. And that is so important to me. And if I didn't truly believe that, I wouldn't be wasting my time here today.
Thank you, everybody, for those really, it's nice that you were able to personalize it in that way, so I really appreciate those responses. We're at the end of our debate, so deep breath. Thank you so much for being here, but you do have one more minute to address our audience. We're going to start in reverse order this time, so the first person who will give his closing statement for 1 minute is Brad Harness, the Consensus Party.
Well, thank you. Representative democracy is supposed to be all about MPPs at Queen's Park finding out what people think and finding out in great depth, talking to random people, not just their party members, but people who don't join their party and don't support their party's views, finding out what their riding's wants and needs are, and then faithfully representing that requirement at Queen's Park in the Ontario Legislature. The priorities and needs of those ridings is what makes good decisions, or what should make good decisions. It's not supposed to be about parties controlling MPPs to sell their party priorities to the voters. This makes for poor decisions. Consensus Ontario is about getting rid of all parties, including our own, and replacing it with independents who can properly represent their ridings in a system of consensus government, which has been used in the North for over 100 years. I believe Ontario needs consensus government now. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Brad. Next, we'll hear a closing statement from Jacques Boudreau for the Libertarian Party.
Thank you. Sadly, today what you've heard from the traditional parties is more of the same. More central planning, which has an appalling track record, complete disconnection from reality regarding deficit, debt, unfunded liabilities. All of those apparently do not exist. We have a healthcare crisis in the making due to a demographics problem that none of them will acknowledge. And they have been kicking the problem down the road for decades. And sure looks to me like they're going to do more of the same, which is going to lead to a crisis, a massive crisis. This can't go on like this. I urge you to vote for the Libertarian Party if you want someone who's going to be fiscally responsible and aware of these problems, because you can't solve a problem that you're not aware of. And of course, I'm standing for your freedom and civil liberties. If they are important to you, then vote Libertarian. We are going to return them to you in full. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacques. The next candidate that is going to give closing statement is Peggy Sattler for the NDP.
Thank you, Brona. It's been the honor of my life to represent the people of London West. I have had the privilege of meeting and celebrating so many amazing people who are doing wonderful things for our community. But I've also had the heartbreak of hearing how the system has failed, how vulnerable Londoners aren't getting the home care they need, how good tenants are being evicted from their homes after years of paying the rent on time, how seniors have been forgotten during COVID-19 and are still being ignored, how hard hardworking families are struggling to pay the bills, how Muslims and racialized Londoners continue to face Islamophobia, discrimination, and hate. Together, we can do better than this. We need a government that will fix the things that matter most to you, and an MPP who won't stop fighting for the healthcare, housing, and community supports you need. My record shows that I care, and I can get results, and I would be honored to have your support once again.
Thank you, Peggy. Next, we'll hear a closing statement from Cynthia Workman for the Ontario Party.
I believe it was Albert Einstein who said the definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over and expecting different results. That is what voting for the three legacy parties is like. Over time, they have all shown toddler-like fiscal discipline and a spending addiction with the taxpayer's wallet. As the province sinks under heavy debt and overreaching dictatorial policies to satisfy the fanatical ideologies and financial gains of the men who prosper, hard-working and patriotic Ontarians like you and I struggle to eat and breathe. Ontario has influence and clout to create change and put pressure on the feds to reject policies that are burdensome and oppressive to Ontarians, but they don't. Instead, they form a tag team of tyranny with them. The Ontario Party is the Freedom Party, and we are ready, and I am ready, to fight to the wall for all Ontarians and to keep the true north strong and free, and that includes London West. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Next, we'll hear from Colleen McCauley, the Green Party candidate.
Well, again, thank you everyone for being involved in this, and thank you for having me. Thank you for your moderators. Ontario Greens have new solutions to Ontario's old problems. We see the cracks in the foundations, and it's not worth papering over. We need to fix the past mistakes. Our vision is that Ontario will care for its people and our planet. We want to tackle the housing crisis and improve our healthcare system, as well as address climate change. Ontario needs connected communities and to address the affordability crisis. We need to stop spending billions on highways and stop the sprawl. We need to prioritize the well-being of the people that we love and those who care for them. Our growing and sustainable economy is at the heart of everything that Ontario Greens believe in, and we need to restore and protect our natural infrastructure to lessen the blow of climate change. We want to embrace a new climate economy and secure the future we deserve, that you deserve, with the leadership you need. Half measures and no measures won't do, so please act now. Don't sit this one out. Vote Green. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Freedom Party candidate Mike McMullen, your closing statement.
Hi, my name is Mike McMullen, and I'm running provincially for the Freedom Party of Ontario. And I think today we can all agree that freedom is essential. The freedom of conscience and religion, the freedom of thought, the freedom of belief and opinion, the freedom of expression, including the freedom of the press, the freedom of peaceful assembly, and the freedom of association. All freedom-loving people from all parties need to unify an alliance together so we can have robust debates, share ideas from a broad range of perspectives, and come together with a consensus without fear of retaliation or retribution. What I would like to see is I want to bring jobs back to London. I want to bring skilled workers back to London. I want to really increase the economy, because the more jobs and the more people that are out working, that's more money that'll contribute to the economy in itself. I want to put the people of London West first, and I want London West to be an example of how the other ridings in Ontario should run. So thank you to the moderators for having me here. I really appreciate it. And thanks for everybody else, and thanks to the other candidates for this debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And finally, closing statement from Vanessa Lalonde, the Liberal Party candidate.
Thank you very much for having us here today and this opportunity to speak to you all. This coming election is so important. The outcome decides whether or not protected land is irreversibly destroyed for a highway, whether our nurses get the support they need and the respect they deserve. It decides whether or not there's going to be more funding cuts that affects our children's futures. And it decides that if, as a province, we're going to stand up against racism or pretend that we don't have that problem here. I am asking for your support to help move Ontario forward to a brighter future. Thank you.
Fantastic answers. Thank you, everybody. And that does it for our time here today. Thank you to all of the candidates in attendance. Thank you to Fanshawe College and their television production and broadcast journalism programs for partnering to put on the debate. I want to encourage you to get out and vote on June 2nd. And on election night, you can watch the local results on Rogers TV beginning at 9 p.m. or tune in to 106.9 The X. Thanks for watching.